As both Father Quinn and I mentioned earlier, it is our pleasure this morning to have with us Dr. Frank Homer from the History Department. Dr. Homer is a University of Scranton graduate and a Woodrow Wilson Scholar in History from the University of Virginia. He has been on the faculty of the University of Scranton since 1968. For more than 3 decades, Dr. Homer has been a pre-law advisor, and he is a charter member of the Northeast Association of Pre-Law Advisors. He has served as Grand Marshal at Commencement for over 30 years, and he was an early recipient of the John L. Earl III Award for Distinguished Service by Faculty. He is currently Professor Emeritus and the University Historian. We are very pleased to have Dr. Frank Homer with us this morning, and again, we apologize for the delay, but I'm sure you will enjoy Dr. Homer's presentation. Dr. Homer.
Thank you. Hopefully this will be worth waiting for. In any case, what you are seeing on the screen right now is where what is now the University of Scranton first came into existence. We date our foundation from August the 12th, 1888. On that day, the first Bishop of Scranton, Bishop William O'Hara, laid a cornerstone for a building for a college to be named the College of St. Thomas Aquinas, or simply St. Thomas College. The building itself was not completed for 4 years. St. Thomas College did not actually begin operation classes until September of 1892, but as I said, we date our foundation from the laying of that cornerstone. It took 4 years for the building to be built, not because it took that long for the construction, but it took that long for the bishop to raise the money. When he laid the cornerstone, he did not have the funds to complete the construction of the building, but he had faith that it could be done. And the thread that runs through the history of this university from that day in 1888 to this very day in the year 2012 is that very idea of acts of faith. This university has existed from its beginning through its entire history through a series of ongoing acts of faith. Acts of faith in our benefactors, acts of faith in our alumni, and acts of faith in our mission, starting with Bishop O'Hara. The cornerstone, the building that was built, no longer exists. That building was torn down in the mid-1960s, several years after the university vacated it. So it's no longer there. The cornerstone, however, is still here. It was taken out of that building in 1962 when St. Thomas Hall was constructed here on our existing campus, and the 1888 cornerstone was put right underneath the St. Thomas Hall 1962 cornerstone. It's not easily seen because it's on the side of St. Thomas Hall that faces down Linden Street, where there are entrances that are currently offline. To the side of those entrances, the cornerstone for St. Thomas is located, and right underneath it, the 1888 cornerstone. But there is vegetation that makes it difficult to see them. There is a commemorative marker in front of it that I think many people look at and think that's the 1888 cornerstone. No, it's a marker. The cornerstone itself is actually in the structure of St. Thomas Hall, but as I said, it's not easily seen because it's obscured by vegetation. I'm hoping that at some point we'll be celebrating our 125th anniversary in not much more than a year, and I hope that at that point the original cornerstone can be put somewhere where it is much more visible. In any case, that was a building that's never got an official name, although over the years it came to be known simply as Old Main. Now, it's located in the 300 block of Wyoming Avenue. The illustration there doesn't give you a clear idea of its location, but if I show you the next picture, this is a picture taken some years later. It would be probably sometime in the 1920s. You can see the building there, and you can see, of course, to the left of it, the bishop's residence, the cathedral rectory, and St. Peter's Cathedral. Those structures are, of course, still very much there, and most of you who are from the area, I think when you look at that, you say, oh, I know where that was. That's where Old Main was. To the right of Old Main is a structure that was built a few years later in 1908 as a residence for the faculty of St. Thomas College, which at that time were the Christian Brothers. That was the brothers' residence. That building also is still standing. It's now a convent used by the IHM nuns that are serving in Center City. Where Old Main was, the cathedral some years ago established a prayer garden. In between the cathedral rectory, the bishop's residence, and that convent where Old Main used to be is now a cathedral prayer garden. In any case, that's where St. Thomas College began, with Old Main in the middle of the 300 block of Wyoming Avenue. As I said, the college didn't actually begin operation until 1892. When it did, it was run at first exclusively by the bishop. The faculty were all young diocesan priests. The students were mostly taking not college courses, but much more high school courses. In any case, that's what it was for the first few years. In 1896, the bishop invited a religious order to come in to take over the administration of the college, the Xaverian Brothers, who had been involved in a number of educational operations, although mostly on the secondary level. They were only here for 1 year. For a number of reasons, it was not a good fit. They were only here for the academic year 1896-97. In 1897, the Xaverian Brothers withdrew, and the bishop invited the Brothers of the Christian Schools, or more simply, the Christian Brothers, a religious order that had much more experience in education, not just on the secondary level, but on the higher education level as well. The Brothers arrived in 1897. For 45 years, the college was under the administration of the Christian Brothers. However, the ownership of the college was still vested in the bishop in the Diocese of Scranton. The brothers were the ones who made St. Thomas College into a real college. When they arrived, they began putting together a college baccalaureate program, and by 1900, the first graduates of St. Thomas College received bachelor's degrees. However, when they did, at first, those diplomas were not issued in the name of St. Thomas College, because St. Thomas College at that point still did not have a charter from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that would authorize it to issue degrees. And so the first baccalaureate degrees that were earned by graduates of St. Thomas College were issued in diplomas that had the name of other Christian Brother schools that were, had charters that allowed them to confer baccalaureate degrees. Lasalle College, now Lasalle University in Philadelphia, which is still run by the Christian Brothers, was one. There was also a Christian Brothers school in Washington, D.C., St. John's College, that was also used. That school is no longer there. In any case, though, by the turn of the century, that is the 20th century, St. Thomas College was a true college. However, there were still some glitches in the road. In the 19-teens, World War I began in Europe. Even before the United States entered the war in 1916, President Wilson initiated the draft, and young men began to be drafted into the military, young men who otherwise would have been students in colleges and universities. Enrollment at St. Thomas College dropped, and in 1917, the college pulled back from being a 4-year baccalaureate degree granting school to a 2-year junior college. That remained the case from 1917 until 1921. In 1921, the then Christian Brother president of the college, in obviously agreement with the bishop, decided that the time had come for the college to return to being a baccalaureate degree granting school, and that it was also high time for the college to get its charter. That was done. In the fall of 1921, the college again admitted entering students that would be there for 4 years and would receive their baccalaureate degree in 1925. Before they graduated, however, in 1923, the university acquired its charter for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. A replica of that is you can find it in the president's office. So that by the time that first class graduated in 1925, the college had its charter, and the diplomas were issued in the name of St. Thomas College. And of course, the college and now the university has remained a four-year college ever since. And of course now, in more recent years, we offer a number of graduate degrees, including a doctorate in physical therapy. In any case, by the late 20s, the college was entering into what some see as the golden years of St. Thomas College. Enrollment was growing. By the end of the 20s, by the beginning of the 1930s, enrollment was at 1,000 students and remained pretty much at that level for most of the 1930s. The college attained a reputation for academic quality. By 1928, the college also was accredited by the Middle States Association and has been ever since. Its sports teams also acquired a great deal of fame. This was before the NCAA, and small schools like St. Thomas College were able to schedule games in basketball and especially football with much larger schools. And St. Thomas College would often hold their own. And football at St. Thomas was, in the 1920s and through the 1930s, without question, the dominant sport. In the late 30s, in 1939, St. Thomas College, although at that point it was already, by 1939, it had become, the name was changed to the University of Scranton. But that year's football team was the one and only football team that for the entire season was undefeated. Now they did have one tie, so they weren't all victories, but with one exception, one game that ended in a tie, all the other games were victories. And that year, this is 1939, St. Thomas, or the university as I should say by then, played a game with the City College of New York City, in New York City, at Lewisam Stadium, which I think is still there in Manhattan. The game was televised. RCA and the National Broadcasting Corporation were just beginning to work with color television, and they were experimenting with athletic contests in the New York area. There were only a handful of people who had television sets in New York City, but that game between the university and CCNY was televised, one of the first sports contests ever to be televised. In any case, as I said, athletics along with academics became areas that the college became adept in. And as I said, the 1920s were the golden age in many respects. The man you're looking at now is a graduate of St. Thomas College of the class of 1925, the class that received baccalaureate degrees, the first to receive baccalaureate degrees since 1917, and the first to receive diplomas that were issued in the name of St. Thomas College. When he graduated in 1925, he immediately remained at the college as an employee, as the registrar. He remained as registrar from 1925 until 1957, when he moved over to direct the alumni office. He remained a university employee until the day he died in 1976. He was the first of only 3 employees of the university who have been employed as full-time employees for more than a half century. His name is Frank O'Hara, and he is a man whose role in the history of the school has been very central. It is after Frank O'Hara that O'Hara Hall, which the university has occupied since the early 70s, has been named. A building on the corner of Jefferson and Linden, which the university did not construct. That building was originally the headquarters of a coal company, the Glen Alden Coal Company, that the university purchased in the early 70s and shortly afterwards renamed O'Hara Hall. Frank was, he's only one of 3. There's only 2 others. A woman who, I'm sad to say, just passed away within the last month, Marilyn Kaur, was for over 50 years an employee, most of that as the secretary to at least 5 different presidents of the university from the late 40s until the 1970s. The third individual is a faculty member, unfortunately now also deceased, who was a full-time employee for no less than 53 years. That's the record. But as I said, there's only been 3. When I do this at these orientations, I always say that it's, possible. I would like to think that perhaps one of you may well be one of the next to be a full-time employee for a half century or more. Obviously, that's going to take some time, but God willing, you will have the time. In any case, that's Frank O'Hara, as I said, a graduate of the class of 1925. This is an exhibit. I'm pretty sure it's in what was the Armory, a structure that still stands, but the military have now completely vacated it. It's obviously some sort of an exhibition, and there's obviously, you can see there, St. Thomas College had a stand at this local exhibition. This would have been in the 1920s. In any case, as I said, the college was doing well. Enrollment was very healthy, and that continued into the 1930s. Except when the 1930s arrived, the college was faced with the challenge that not just St. Thomas College, but many other institutions and individuals throughout the country were: the Depression. An increasingly large number of the parents who had students, St. Thomas, by the way, was, when it began, all male. The university was an all-male school for its undergraduate day school programs up until 1972. Women were admitted into the evening programs by the late 20s, or excuse me, the late 30s, but the full co-education didn't come until the early 1970s. In any case, the parents whose sons were at the college found it increasingly difficult to pay tuition. Frank O'Hara, the registrar, made sure that there was not a single student who would have to drop out because they couldn't pay tuition. That was, of course, wonderful. It was charitable, but it meant the revenue stream of the college was increasingly narrowed. And the brothers, who were, of course, now administering the school, the president during the 1930s was President Dennis Edward, Brother Dennis Edward. He is the only Christian brother whose name is on one of the university buildings, one of our older dormitories. Dennis Edward Hall is named after Brother Dennis Edward, who was the president of St. Thomas College from 1931 until 1940. During his tenure, a number of very important things happened. But it was also during his tenure that the Depression caused the college to become increasingly in debt. And the bishop was increasingly asked to continue to provide more money to finance the college's operation. Brother Dennis Edward, though, he wanted very much to bring women not into the day school, but into the evening programs. And in 1938, he finally did so, prevailing over, initially, the bishop was reluctant because there was much objections from Marywood College, which was an all-women's school at the time, and they were very fearful that if women started entering our institution, that their enrollment would be threatened. But by 1938, women were admitted to the evening programs and continued to be ever since. And as I said, we went fully co-ed in 1972. Dennis Edward also had another vision. He wanted St. Thomas College to become a university, even though at the time, the only degrees being offered were baccalaureate degrees, no master's degrees. But he single-handedly, he went to the local Court of Common Pleas and filed a petition to have the name of the school changed from St. Thomas College to the University of Scranton. The local court issued the permission, and in the spring of 1938, the name of the school was changed from St. Thomas College to the University of Scranton, which of course has been our name ever since. That was done while the brothers were still administering the college. For some reason, there are still a lot of people here locally that think it was the Jesuits who changed the name when they arrived. That was not the case. The Jesuits would not enter into the picture until 4 years later, in 1942. However, by the end of the 30s, the resources of the brothers, in terms of manpower and their monetary resources, were such that they were finding it increasingly difficult to be able to continue to administer the college. By 1940, the bishop and the brothers had pretty much come to an agreement that the brothers would simply have to withdraw from administering the University of Scranton because they simply did not have the resources. They didn't have manpower. The bishop wanted as much as possible to have all of the faculty made up of brothers who, of course, were members of a religious order under a vow of poverty, and of course their salaries did not have to be that extensive. Lay faculty, which the college had starting in the early 20s, there was an increasingly large number of the faculty who were lay people, and of course lay people needed a living wage to support their families. In any case, by 1940, the brothers and the bishop at the time was Bishop William Hafey, had reached an agreement, sort of unwritten, but that the brothers were going to have to pull the plug. That officially happened by the end of the following year. By the end of 1941, the brothers officially informed the bishop that they would, at the end of the 1941-42 academic year, be withdrawing from Scranton, and that the bishop was going to have to find another way of administering the college. By the late 30s, though, enrollment was continuing to grow, again, thanks to Frank O'Hara. Even students whose families were having difficulty paying the tuition remained enrolled, and so the enrollment remained healthy, and the physical plant began to get increasingly challenged. The original physical plant of St. Thomas College, and after 1938 it's the University of Scranton, was Old Main, supplemented only by, on the other side, I don't know if I can go back. I don't think, at least I don't see how I can get back. So let me, if you recall the slide where Old Main was, you have the brothers' residence. On the other side of the brothers' residence, there was a private home. There was the home of the Troop family, the family after whom the borough of Troop is named, that the diocese purchased sometime by the 1920s that was used to supplement Old Main. It was not a very aesthetic-looking structure, and there are very few photographs of it that I have been able to find. But that house, the Troop House as it was called, was used for classroom space, and in the back of the Troop House, where they had originally their stables, there was a building that was eventually constructed that was used for chemistry laboratories. As I said, by the late 30s, the physical plant was becoming cramped. The physical plant, though, at the very end of the 30s, the very beginning of the 40s, actually grew. At the end of 1940, in December of 1940, the bishop was able to acquire a property on the other side of the Troop House that would have been on the corner of what was then Wyoming Avenue and Mulberry Street. It was a large structure that had been built in the late 19th century as a private hospital run by a Dr. Thompson. In the 1930s, the Thompson Hospital closed down. Dr. Thompson died, and the hospital closed. And by 1940, the bishop was able to acquire that building as a supplement to Old Main and the Troop House. By 1941, the university was starting to have some classes in the former Thompson Hospital building, which they simply called the Annex. The only problem was that just about at that time, when the university's physical plant was now growing, the enrollment began to drop significantly because, again, war had erupted in Europe starting in 1939, and even before the United States became a belligerent, Franklin Roosevelt in 1940 reintroduced the draft. And so by the end of 1940, young men who otherwise would have been coming to college were now being drafted into the military again. And so quite frankly, once the annex was acquired, not long afterwards, it was not really needed. Old Main was now, for the time being, more than sufficient for the dropping enrollment. As I said, by the end of 1941, the brothers officially told the bishop that they were leaving at the end of that academic year. At the end of 1941, there was also a very significant event for the university that came very much unexpected. In December of 1941, the Scranton family, a founding family of the city after whom the city is named, donated their family residence, which was located in the lower hill section here in the city of Scranton, to the bishop with specific instructions that it be given to St. Thomas College. The Scranton family had no connection with the university, no connection with the bishop. It was a gift that came totally out of the blue. This is a photograph of the Scranton family home when it was first constructed in 1872 in the lower hill section, in a property that was bounded by Madison Avenue, Monroe Avenue, Linden Street, and by the railway tracks, what's called Ridge Road. It was a large estate with the estate house surrounded by a lot of acreage, as well as some other supplemental buildings. This is what it looked like when it was first built. This is years before it had anything to do with the university. This, though, is what it looked like in the 1930s. You'll notice there's a tower on top of it, and it was covered with a lot of ivy. This is what it looked like when the university acquired it at the end of 1941. The tower had been taken down, and next to the front door, you can see a kind of a wooden addition where an elevator was installed by the Scranton family. That elevator was eventually taken out, and there is now inside the estate an elevator that was installed by the university, by the Jesuits, after they took it as their community residence. In any case, it comes to the university in December of 1941. Along with it, though, came other blocks of property the Scranton family owned on the corner of Monroe Avenue and Linden Street. There were two pieces of property on which there were at the time no structures that were also given to the university along with the Scranton estate itself. But at this point, at the end of 1941, enrollment had already dropped enough that the university was not really looking for more physical plant. And so initially, when they first got the Scranton Estate House, it was really not used until the Jesuits arrived. The Jesuits arrive when Bishop Hayfie, at the very beginning of January of 1942, goes to New York City to meet with the Jesuit provincials to offer them the university, not simply the administration of the university, but its ownership. The university at that time was significantly in debt. And so what he was asking the Jesuits to do was to take over the ownership of an institution whose enrollment was dropping. By January of 1942, the United States was in the war. Pearl Harbor was, of course, also December 1941. A war whose duration nobody had any idea of how long it will be, except there was no question it was not going to be short. And as long as it was going on, college enrollments throughout the United States were not likely to be very healthy. And when you consider those circumstances, there is another remarkable act of faith on the part of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits who agreed to come to Scranton to take over not just the administration, but the ownership of a school at a time when college enrollments were likely to be very small, as long as the war was going to go on. And it was an institution that was significantly in debt, and the Jesuits were agreeing to assume that debt, and they did. They arrived in June of 1942. They decided they would use the Scranton Estate House as their community residence. The brothers' residence that the brothers had been using on Wyoming Avenue was not large enough. The Jesuits were bringing a much larger number of Jesuits than there had been Christian brothers. This is the original Jesuit community. In the middle of the front row with the gray hair is the first Jesuit president, Reverend J. Coleman Nevels. Another one of our older dormitories is named after Father Nevels. He was the first Jesuit president. He served as Jesuit president from 1942 to 1947. The second Jesuit president is again in the front row, second in from the right. J. Eugene Gallery was a member of the original Jesuit community, and in 1947 he became the second Jesuit president, serving from 1947 until 1953. Well, the Jesuits arrived, and at first, during the war, while the war was still going on between 1942 and 45, there was still enrollment because the university made a point of offering accelerated programs for young men who could get at least some college credits in before they would be drafted. And then, after the war, they could return and finish their degree programs. So there was enrollment, but it was minimal. It was supplemented by the fact that the university, which now, of course, had a charter, which was not the case back in the First World War, we were able to train cadets. Naval cadets were being trained in the annex building. However, the annex suffered a serious fire in 1943. Thankfully, the only natural disaster that has significantly damaged any piece of the university's physical plant in its history. The annex suffered a serious fire, and at that point, it was fortunately well insured, and so the university was able to repair it. And at that point, the war was still going on. The university didn't really need the annex anymore for part of its physical plant. And so in 1944, they used the former Thompson building, now repaired after the fire, to start a Jesuit high school. The Scranton Preparatory School opened in 1944 in what had once been the Thompson Hospital, and what the university briefly called its annex. The prep remained there until 1961, when Mulberry Street was widened. If you go down Mulberry Street and you get to Wyoming Avenue, if you're heading toward the expressway, you will notice that Wyoming Avenue broadens once you get past Wyoming Avenue. It's all what would be the southern side that was used to widen it. And the building, the old Thompson Hospital, the prep building, had to be taken down in order to widen Mulberry Street. The prep briefly used Old Main because it was around that time the university was vacating Old Main, and for a couple of years the prep was in Old Main, but then starting in 1963 they moved out to the 1000 block of Wyoming Avenue, where they have been ever since, and where they have a magnificent facility that they've added on to in the last few years. In any case though, when the war ends though, things change dramatically. The enrollment mushroomed beyond what it had been even back in the 1920s and 30s. By 1947, the university was admitting over 1,000 students, not just in the fall, but in the spring. Old Main was bursting at the seams. When the Jesuits arrived, the troop house itself was torn down because it was such a bad structure. In the back, the chemistry labs were still used. They were called the C building for chemistry. The annex was no longer available. The prep was using that. And for a while, the university was leasing property in Central City, wherever they could find it, for supplemental classroom space. But it was clear that that was just an expedient. But the university did have the pieces of property that it had gotten from the Scranton family at the same time they had gotten the estate residence that they had not used, but now decided that they were going to start to use them to supplement Old Main down on Wyoming Avenue. In 1947, the university acquired 3 surplus Navy barracks, which they constructed in the Lower Hill section, and for 15 years, from 1947 until 1962, the university's campus was split between Old Main down on Wyoming Avenue and the barracks buildings that were up in the Lower Hill section, which is where all of the university's campus is now. There were 3 of them. The one you're looking at right now, was called the A building. A for arts. The English department, philosophy, theology were housed there. You're looking at it there, and if you were looking at that today, you would be looking at the front of Weinberg Library. That's on the corner of Monroe Avenue and what was still a city street, Linden Street. This is long before the Commons comes to pass. That was the A building. I went through, there was another view of the A building. This is the B building. This is on the other side of Linden Street, located where the upper part of St. Thomas would be. The house that you see on the left-hand side is where the Long Center would be now. In between the B building and that house was a small Catlin Court, which still exists. It's the roadway between the Commons and Ridge Row, over which the communications wing of St. Thomas Hall is now built. But that walkway, it's more of a walkway than a roadway now, but it's still, I think, the city still thinks of it as Catlin Court. That's the B building. Both the A building and B building were H-shaped structures, and as I said, they were aesthetically not, anyone would call handsome. They're very functional. The other looked differently. It was a long rectangular barracks building called the E building, which was originally used for physics and electronics. It later, before it was torn down, was used as a cafeteria and a chapel. That's located where the lower part of St. Thomas Hall is. That's a picture of it as it looked when it was first erected in 1947. This is a little bit later, and again, you're looking at it now from an angle where if you were looking at that today, you would be seeing the lower part of St. Thomas Hall. On the corner of Monroe, and again, what at that time was still Linden Street, not the Commons. For 15 years, those barracks buildings served the university. They were not aesthetic. There was no air conditioning. During the hot months, students were hanging out of the windows to get some ventilation, but they were functional. But students would sometimes have classes down on Old Main, and 15 minutes later, they'd have a class in one of the barracks buildings. And so university students between 1947 and 1962 would often be found running up and down Linden Street. I mean, all the way from Wyoming Avenue up. I mean, students nowadays grouse when they have a class in McGurran and have to go up to, say, the new Science Center. But that's only half of the distance between the campus where we are now and the 300 block of Wyoming Avenue, down where the cathedral is. Enrollment, of course, was now, after the war, growing. Even with the barracks, the physical plant was cramped. Finally, though, in 1953, the third Jesuit president arrived, the Reverend John J. Long. That is him standing to the left. He was president for 10 years, longer than any president before him. And there's only been one president since who has served longer than Father Long, Reverend J. Allen Ponuska, who has served for president for 16 years between 1982 and 1998. That is the current record for presidential tenure. Standing to the right of Father Long is Brother Dennis Edward. This was some years later when Brother Dennis Edward, obviously much older, returned to get an honorary degree from the university. And Father Long was the president. Father Long decided it was time to do something that the university had not done since Bishop O'Hara in 1888, build new buildings. During the 10 years that he was president, every single classroom, every single office, every single laboratory was changed. When he left the presidency in 1963, there was only one facility that was still online when he arrived in 1953. The estate, the Jesuit residence. Everything else was changed, and much of it with new construction. Beginning with, in 1956, Loyola Hall of Science, the original Loyola Hall of Science. I mean, right now, it's a little confusing around here when you say Loyola, because there's Loyola Hall, the old Loyola Hall, and now the new Loyola Science Center. The old Loyola Hall will eventually be torn down, but just when that's going to happen is still not entirely clear. That's what it looked like when it was first constructed in 1956. In the 1980s, it was significantly rehabbed, including when it was first built. You will notice that it has 3 full floors. There's actually a basement that you can't see. But the top 4th floor was only a small part. In the mid-'80s, it was redone, renovated, and the entire fourth floor was added. Now the fourth floor is a full floor. And the exterior of the building looks a bit different. There was originally a radio tower for the university's radio station that was on the top of the original Loyola Hall. In the foreground, you can see, well, the gateway to the Catlin House, the Lackawanna Historical Society, is still there. To the left, though, is obviously parking in what was for a long time the parking lot for St. Thomas Hall, but more recently is now where the new Loyola Science Center is still in the process of being finished. That's Loyola Hall at night lit up, and a lot of glass. It also had a staircase that's still there in the front of the building with marble steps. Because of that marble, the opening it was originally supposed to come online at the beginning of the fall of 1956. It was not dedicated and opened, though, until December of 1956, because the marble for that staircase was ordered from Italy and was shipped to the United States on a vessel called the Andrea Doria, which sank before it got to New York City. And the marble had to be reordered. And that delayed the opening of Loyola Hall for maybe 5 or 6 months. Another new building that Father Long built, the construction was finished in 1959, but the opening didn't come until the following year. A new library, Alumni Memorial Library, to replace the library that had been back in Old Main. It came online and opened for business in September of 1960. It's still there, and it still looks a good deal as it does when it was first built. It's now, however, no longer a library. We now have a much newer library, the Weinberg Library, and when the Weinberg Library was built, the Alumni Memorial Library became Alumni Memorial Hall. A building used for a variety of purposes. There are some departments in there, academic departments. IT, I think, occupies a lot of space in there. And of course, there's been added to it a microbiology institute that is attached to it that was built some years ago. But that's Alumni Memorial Library, now Alumni Memorial Hall. September of 1960 also saw a student center built in the 900 block of Linden Street, across from where the B building and the A building would have been, and to the left of the student center would be where the A building would have been located. That building was opened in 1960. It was originally just a student center. Years later, though, it was named after an alumnus named Joseph Gunster and became known as the Gunster Center. It's no longer there. It was torn down a few years ago when we built a much newer student center that we are now, as I speak, in, the DeNaples Center. Where Gunster was is now the Dion Green. The green space in front of DeNaples is where this building was located between 1960 and 2000 and maybe 5 or 6, whenever it was taken down. When it was first built, the third floor had an open balcony. But years later, the Gunster was added to several times before it was taken down. And included, the third floor open patio was enclosed to make a third floor cafeteria. This photograph actually shows the front of Gunster. This is around the time that the building of the Commons was just getting underway. But when the Student Center was first built, Linden Street was just that, a city street. 1962, Father Long builds a big new classroom academic administration building, St. Thomas Hall, named after the college that the university originally was. That's located where the E building in the foreground and the B building further up would have been located. When St. Thomas Hall was being built, the B building and the E building were taken out. The A building, though, remained in use up until St. Thomas Hall opened in 1962. When St. Thomas Hall opened in 1962, the university was able to vacate Old Main completely. As of the fall of 1962, for the first time since 1947, the entire physical plant of the university was pretty much contiguous in the lower hill section where it remains. Of course, it's expanded considerably, but it's still pretty much all contiguous. Old Main was given back to the bishop, and after the prep used it for a couple of years, and then after that, the bishop, the diocese tore it down, and years later, as I said, the Cathedral Prayer Garden is located there. This is St. Thomas as it was originally built. St. Thomas was added on to, particularly in the upper wing, 3 or 4 times. The Harper McGinnis was actually built in 2 stages, and then the communications wing of St. Thomas was added straddling Kaplan Court. But this is the way the building looked when it was first opened. Notice that the windows on the lower floor look different than they do now, because that originally was a chapel, St. Ignatius Chapel, where Human Resources now has its very nice facilities, is part of what used to be simply a chapel, and those windows indicate where the chapel was. The doors there are, again, to the right of those doors is where the cornerstones are. But as I said, they're behind bushes. This is a picture pretty much from the same angle in color. But again, notice that Linden Street is still Linden Street. It's a city street. It's not Commons. But that's St. Thomas. Father Long also built the first university residence halls, starting with the lower quad. And that was in 1958. 4 years later, in 1962, the upper quad. In 1965, Neville's and Driscoll. Neville's named after the first Jesuit president, Driscoll after another member of the class of 1925, one of Frank O'Hara's classmates, who was a longtime university faculty member, James Driscoll. In 1960, and this is another picture of the dorms, both the lower quad and the upper quad. Notice again, Linden Street is still Linden Street. It's not clear from this picture, but I think at least the construction of the Long Center is underway. Father Long left the presidency in 1963, but the Driscoll and Neville's were part of the physical plant plans that he set in motion, as well as a varsity athletic center that was fittingly named after Father Long. It opened in 1971. Excuse me, I misspeak, 1967. Father Long was still alive. When he stepped down as president, he remained in residence here in Scranton until he died in 1971. He was still alive to see the Long Center built, which was in many ways the final piece of the construction that he started. The plans for, when he came to the presidency in 1953, he announced in 1954 a multi-million-dollar building plan. And between 1956 and 1967, there were, St. Thomas Hall, the new library, Loyola Hall, all of the dormitories, the Long Center were all constructed. He even acquired from the Scranton family some remaining parts of the Scranton estate that were not part of what was given to the university in 1941. The President's Office building, what we now call Scranton Hall. The Scranton family still use that as their family business headquarters. The greenhouse and the Gothic-looking building that was built by the Scranton family as a squash court. Those 3 all came to the university in 1958. Father Long moved the president's office to where it is today in 1958. It had been down on Wyoming Avenue up until 1958. The squash court the university used for a variety of purposes. The football team used it as a training facility. For years it was a print shop. Then the alumni took it over. Then admissions used it as a visitor center. But most recently, and I think now permanently, it's become a small chapel, the Chapel of the Sacred Heart, to replace the chapel that had been in St. Thomas Hall. St. Ignatius Chapel no longer exists, but now you've got the Sacred Heart Chapel. Now there's a much larger chapel up in a rock hall, Madonna della Strada. In any case, that completed Father Long's building. For 17 years, the university did no more building between 1967 and 1984. No new construction. Enrollment by the early 70s was starting to drop a bit, and that's one of the reasons why we went co-ed. No question about it. I mean, if we remained all male, we were going to have trouble filling seats. We got a new curriculum. The university's governance also changed. Starting in the early 70s, the university set up its own independent board of trustees. It was no longer owned directly by the Jesuits. The only thing the Jesuits owned outright was their residence, which at the time was still the Scranton Estate House. But they vacated that in 1984 when they built their new residence, Campion Hall, which they own. That's not university property, but the Estate House now is, and that's now been used for a variety of purposes, and now currently is being used by admissions. It's a very handsome facility. If you've never been inside there, I would encourage you to do it. I mean, of course, it was built long before it had anything to do with the university, but it is a handsome structure, the Estate House. By the late 70s, though, enrollment began to grow. Once we became co-ed, new curriculum, enrollment began to increase until by the early 80s, our physical plant, even with the buildings that Father Long had built. J. Allen Ponuska came to the presidency in 1982. He finally recognized the time to build again had come, and he started, and we've never stopped. Literally, I mean, there has hardly been a period of 6 months in which there has not been new construction going on since 1984 to the present. This, by the way, is what, again, it looked like when Linden Street was still Linden Street. It was not until 1976 that the university, after years and years, got the city of Scranton to agree to close the 9 and 1000 blocks of Linden Street between Monroe Avenue and Clay Avenue. It took a long time, but it was finally done. But that's what it looked like before the Commons was the Commons. You can see one of the lower quad dorms. You can see the Student Center. St. Thomas Hall is there to the left. The Long Center you can't see, but it's there. But Linden Street is still a street. But we finally got the city, and this is, you know, the very next day after this, at 6 o'clock in the morning, the university was out there tearing it up so that it couldn't be redone, just in case the city council changed their mind. It was going to be too late because the street would no longer be there. This is what it looked like when it was first done. The Commons with the Z-bricks. The lights have been replaced. The lights were never that, you know, aesthetic, but now the lighting, the lights along the Commons are much more attractive. But that's what it looked like when it was first built. This, by the way, is the A building being taken down. This photograph was taken from St. Thomas Hall because once St. Thomas Hall came online in 1962, the remaining barracks buildings, the A building, came down. As I said, that's now where the front of Weinberg Library is located, but between 1962 and 2000, or excuse me, 1992, you've got a period of 30 years where the Weinberg Library was, the university used for tennis courts and basketball courts. This is what it looked like for a while. Notice that in the rear, you've got properties on Mulberry Street that are now where our newest dormitories are. The new residence halls on Mulberry Street are where those buildings in the background are. And to the left is where the parking garage is now, and the McDade Center. This is a photograph. It's dated 1977. By that time, the university had acquired those properties where the parking garage is and where McDade is, but we hadn't started to build on them. The tennis courts and basketball courts were actually beautified into a complex called the Galvin Terrace by the 1980s. And by this time, the Commons was in place. But then in 1992, Father Ponuska, one of his many constructions, was the new library, the Weinberg Library. This is when it was dedicated. And the front of the library is where Galvin Terrace had been, and where, if you go back further, the A building had been. This is the first piece of construction under Father Ponuska. Reddington Hall, the dormitory complex at the top of the Commons. That was opened in 1984. That's a view of Reddington from the rear, where there's a very steep slope down to the railroad tracks. Gavigan College, another dormitory complex, was also erected only a few years after Reddington. And then you've got all the construction sets. I mean, all the rest of the pictures would be pictures of buildings that are still very much here, and you know, you can see them for yourselves. But Father Ponuska, between 1984 and 1998. Reddington, Gavigan, the new library, 2 classroom buildings, Highland Hall, down in what we call the western part of the campus, and McGurran, where the Panuska College is headquartered. They were all constructed under Father Panuska. But even after when he left, Father Joseph McShane, now president of Fordham University, was here for 5 years, he continued construction. Brennan Hall, where the School of Management was constructed under Father McShane's tenure. And the townhouse residences on both sides of Mulberry Street. And then Father Pillars arrived. Well, he joined in on the construction bandwagon. The Naples Center was actually started during his tenure. It didn't officially, I guess officially it opened. It was actually Father McShane who started the planning for the Naples Center, but its construction was finished during Father Pillars' tenure. And of course, Father Quinn. The Science Center, the construction of that was begun, of course, while Father Pillars was still president. Much of it is now online, along with the new dormitories on Mulberry Street. But the Science Center, there's still parts of that are still being finished. The second phase that ties it into St. Thomas Hall. You can see that the upper part of St. Thomas Hall is very much still an area of much construction. All of that will be finished probably within another year or so. But then there's others. The physical therapy, occupational therapy people who were down in Leahy Hall. That's another building that the university did not build itself but acquired during the 1970s. It had been a YWCA. The facilities for PT and OT there are badly in need of updating. And so my guess is that it won't be long before there's going to be big construction down on that part of the campus. Leahy Hall may possibly be taken down and replaced with an entirely new structure. Or if it isn't, it will be gutted and totally redone. It's a question of which is going to cost the least. In any case, and all of this is an act of faith. When Father Pillars, laid the cornerstone, had the groundbreaking for the Loyola Science Center, which was going to cost somewhere around $90 million, give or take, he didn't have the money, but we had faith in our benefactors. He was beginning a capital campaign that had a goal, I think initially of about $100 million, but then they quickly increased the goal to 125. When the campaign was finished, it brought in, I think, 137 was the official total. So our faith in our benefactors, our faith in our mission continues to be justified. But as I said, that's what has been the thread that runs through this entire institution's history, is our act of faith, a faith in our benefactors, and a faith in ourselves, a faith that we are able to continue to fulfill our mission. And so that's it. I'm about a half hour over, but...
And we certainly can't blame Dr. Homer for being a little bit behind the schedule that's printed in front of you. So, are there any questions? Do we have time for a couple? Nothing. Yes?
Yes. 1 second.
Yeah.
Dr. Homer.
Yeah.
I was just trying to get your name right. We know that faith without deeds are dead.
Right.
Now, my question is that faith, of course, gives us the motivation to get things done. But we have to do our part as well.
Oh, absolutely. And the reason why our faith has been justified is that we and all those who have been part of the university's community in one way or another have been able to back up their faith with action.
Which is the right thing to do, of course. But my question is that what actions actually were taken in order to get the finances that were needed to build these two projects? Was there like plans set out?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
Okay.
the university While the brothers were here in the 1930s, there were numerous efforts to try to raise money, but this was in the middle of the Depression. It was not until Father Long came that for the first time the university engaged in a capital campaign. In terms of dollar amounts, what he was looking for in the 1950s pales in comparison to what we're doing now. But if you put it in terms adjusted for inflation, it was still a very ambitious project that Lasalle, Loyola Hall, the Student Center, St. Thomas Hall, maybe 10 different dormitories, and the Long Center all emerge. And then when we started building again under Father Ponuska, the capital campaigns were now coming, with only a few years in between. The most recent capital campaign officially ended sometime around a year or so ago, and I have no doubt that within probably less than 5 years, probably in about 3 years, there will be another capital campaign begun. And we have the ability. Our institutional development people have the skills. But again, none of that would matter except for what's going on here on the campus, what's going on in the classrooms. I mean, I hesitate to speak, for myself, but I can certainly speak, for my faculty colleagues, that what they're doing, providing that kind of transformative experience for our students is what makes this, I mean, if we weren't delivering on that, if we weren't year after year graduating students, close to maybe 1,000 students a year, who go into the world transformed, go into the world prepared to set it on fire, metaphorically, then, all of our work in trying to raise money would not have the success it has. Because our benefactors know that when they grant money to this university, it's going to be well spent. And it will translate into young men and young women going from here to the rest of the universe and having a real impact. So you're right, it's those deeds, it's those actions that make it possible. And again, it's not just the faculty in the classrooms, it's the entire university staff. If it wasn't for the maintenance staff, the clerical staff, what we do in the classrooms couldn't happen. The university has had a reputation literally going back to the 1920s for physical plant maintenance. We have always given attention to that. Those of you who are coming new into the maintenance staff, I can assure you that deferred maintenance is something that this university has had nothing to do with for decades, and it's not going to start now. When we have prospective students and their parents come in on campus, one thing they are always struck by is that this university's campus is so clean and well kept up. And quite frankly, if you go to see other campuses, you will often see not quite the same thing. But that's something we do and we take enormous pride in.
Thank you, Doctor.
Again, thank you, Dr. Holman.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.